Qualys has brought together vulnerability management and patch management, letting security teams discover vulnerabilities and apply patches immediately, all within a single, unified app. Sign up for a free trial of Qualys VMDR, vulnerability management, detection, and response today at securityweekly.com/Qualys. Keeping up with security issues across thousands of web assets without the right approach to web application security is a daunting task. Get ahead with web vulnerability scanning automation from NetSparker, a leader in dynamic and interactive application security testing, known for its ease of use and accurate results. Detect a wide range of vulnerabilities in all legacy and modern web applications, address security bugs at scale by automating the confirmation process, automatically prioritize vulnerabilities, and assign actionable tickets to the right developers in their native workflows for rapid remediation. For more information on how to scale application security with ease, visit securityweekly.com/NetSparker. Well, welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. If you want to stay in the loop, all things Security Weekly, please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe. You can subscribe to all of our shows on the Security Weekly network, including Security and Compliance Weekly, where Jeff Mann is one of the hosts on that show, talking about all things compliance, as well as many other shows. securityweekly.com/subscribe. We got a YouTube channel you can subscribe to, mailing list, and join our Discord server. Also, we've got a new streaming platform. We are now streaming on Twitch. If you hit our main website, you can find that in the upper right-hand corner. And I know that because Adrian Sanabria and I spent a little time doing some web development this week, which is really, we had some hilarious conversations. We're trying to fix like the most esoteric like WordPress CSS bugs in the website, and we're like, wow, we're web developers right now. Like, I wanted to put a sticker on my hat that said web developer because I literally wore my web developer hat today, and I'm like, I'm really only excited about this because it's going to make me better with web app testing and using Burp Suite. And it was a lot of fun, actually, for a while. And then I was like, we need to get someone that has web design experience to do this and not us. But
I was going to say, and I went to the dentist this week and I had a root canal, and ooh, it was so much fun.
Probably, about the same experience, I think. Anytime you use WordPress and CSS in the same sentence, we probably could pull a WordPress vulnerability. I don't know. I don't usually add them to the show because it's usually some kind of esoteric WordPress plugin that had some heinous vulnerability. Although this week we do have a major PHP vulnerability.
Yeah.
I think it was your article, Larry, that had a whole section on how it typically will not impact WordPress because it was in like the next release, like 8 dot something of PHP, and I think the more stable versions of 7 is where all the WordPress sites are at.
The funny part that I was getting out of that was that article. I'm like, what PHP users need to know about the PHP vulnerability? And at that point, I didn't even know there was a PHP vulnerability, and I'm like, oh, here we go, WordPress again. Turns out it was a whole bigger thing than...
but it's a supply chain attack.
For sure.
I mean, they ran their own Git server, and do we know exactly how? Was it like credentialed? Someone hacked their Git server basically and put in some code. The way I understand it is if they put a command injection in the user agent string at a very high level.
Yeah. Yep.
So like if your user agent began with Zerodium, you could then execute commands through the PHP server.
Yeah.
Service, I should say.
Yep.
Which was only like a couple lines of code. Like, I mean, every article had the diffs on there, and you read it, and you're like a little confused, and you read it a second time, and you're like, oh, yeah, like I get the gist of it. Like, most of us get the gist of it reading it, like, oh, yeah, like if I were to do it, it probably wouldn't look all that dissimilar from what they did, right?
Yeah.
No, I was looking at this thinking, remember the time when I thought I would think, I could run a server like that myself and get the security right. I'm like, hell no. Move it to Git, but you got to remember to follow their best practices like multi-factor and shit. Otherwise, game over, man.
Yep. Yeah, you got to protect the auth. But what's interesting, like, is it more in this case? It seems with source code management, you're almost more secure at certain levels in certain aspects if you're running it in the cloud because you're taking advantage of GitHub or GitLab, the services they provide for security.
I mean, they're dealing with this crap. They're dealing with attacks at a level we never saw in our own enterprises. I mean, they got big fat targets on them, but you gotta listen to what they say to secure it. But I'm like, let's leverage that expertise, and hell, it's not that expensive to do it in their service. Is where I've got to pay somebody to run it on my side, even if it's myself.
Right.
It's not free either.
Nope, definitely not.
I mean, you still got to manage your keys. So there is, of course, a responsibility that falls on you, but you're shoveling a lot of that responsibility off to the cloud provider.
Right.
Which is interesting.
Plus, you could,
go ahead, Lee.
go ahead.
But
I
are
was
you
going to say,
really?
plus you've got resources. You can ask questions. It's like, it's not just you Googling. You could like reach out to their support organization and say, hey, help.
And they got a lot of great checks. I don't know what if those checks are built into the service if you run it on your own. But like I know in GitHub, if you commit code that has vulnerabilities in libraries and stuff like that, they'll do some checking of that, as will GitLab.
Yeah.
Yep. So there was that. Not so much one of the sagas we want to talk about, but I want to dig into this.
How are we gonna? How long are we gonna dawdle before we get to the big stories? Of the
Yeah. So I guess let's start with Ubiquiti, and this was the one I believe that Krebs was breaking. Essentially, there was a whistleblower at Ubiquiti, which I don't know how big Ubiquiti's security team is, but I give props to this person just in reading the story. And even if all you know as a listener right now, if you haven't seen the story, that there was a whistleblower at Ubiquiti, that the article kind of hints towards they worked on the security team. Like how many people on their security team and how uncomfortable is it for that person to work, which is kind of interesting in the pandemic. All these folks are probably working from home. So like you don't have maybe that level of scrutiny, right? Like if all the security people go into the office that work for Ubiquiti, let's say there's 20 of them, like are they all looking at each other going, who was the one talking to Krebs? Like who was it?
I thought it was a contractor working an incident for Ubiquiti.
Okay. That could make a little more sense, a little more removed from the situation, right?
I don't remember where.
Well,
I know that
Krebs's article says it was a security professional at Ubiquiti.
At Ubiquiti.
So I don't know if it matters a whole lot.
Yikes. Yeah. I mean, you just put yourself in the shoes of being someone on that team, right?
I mean, this is pretty well used equipment out there in the enterprise. So, like between Meraki, Aruba, and Ubiquiti, that covers most of the market. So, kind of a big deal.
And arguably Ubiquiti, more targeted to the prosumer model for the consumer side. So,
I think most of us have some form of Ubiquiti gear in our networks, right? Because I think we did a whole segment on this. In that we've done a lot of segments on Wi-Fi gear and talked about Ubiquiti, right?
Are you implying that Ubiquiti is ubiquitous?
Within security, like nerd level, so like the consumer.
So it's not just a clever name.
It is not, right? But so I think like consumers are going to go buy like the cheapest Linksys, Netgear, D-Link kind of gear, right? Like if you're really into it on the complete other end of the spectrum, you're going to take some off-the-shelf hardware, assemble the components together. You're going to run Linux on it and build your own access points, and that's cool. And I just haven't had the desire to like go to that level and have enough interest to be able to do that. So if you're somewhere in between those, I think most people land in Ubiquiti. I've talked about in the show in the past, right?
Yeah.
And then go ahead, Jeff.
I'm sorry. There's lots of layers to this, and we could probably spend the whole news segment just peeling this thing apart.
Yeah, between this and the FreeBSD and WireGuard story.
Do it in whatever order you want, Paul. And my PCI spin is only going to be to the extent that we have a lot of customers. I have a lot of customers these days, clients. I'm sorry, I'm supposed to say clients, that are relying more and more on cloud services, be it AWS or Google Cloud. I haven't yet personally done an Azure client.
But perhaps also, Jeff, sorry to interrupt, but also Ubiquiti. I think in certain point of sale applications, I've seen the point of sale provider that obviously in a retail environment, there's going to be some kind of Wi-Fi, right? And I'm not talking about like Home Depots or Target, like big box retailers.
No,
Smaller ones, right? Going to buy a point of sale system, and their registers are going to be dispersed throughout, and likely have some kind of Wi-Fi in them, or have some kind of remote card scanner or whatever. I've seen Ubiquiti in those applications.
Yeah, well, like I said, there's a lot of layers to this, and that's certainly one. What I'm getting at, though, at least one layer that I would like us to talk about at some point, is that so many companies are going to the cloud, putting not just applications but infrastructure up in the cloud. And I first was involved with AWS back when I started working at Tenable, which I'm disturbed to say it was 8 years ago at this point. But the allure of going to the cloud in general, and I'm not picking on AWS specifically, was, hey, it's cheaper. You can save a lot of money. Just put everything in the cloud. And not only is it cheaper, but all the security liability or the compliance liability goes away. And and that was sort of the early, when I was looking at it at Tenable, was like, okay, AWS, as an example, is saying, yeah, we pretty much got you covered for, data center, physical security. Nobody can get to your stuff in our data center type of thing. And even though there was sort of an assumption that clients signing up for AWS or putting things in AWS, we're going to be covered for so many things. It was very much a read the small print. Make sure you know what you're signing up for, what you're getting, what you're not getting from a security perspective.
Right, because there's lines. There's levels of responsibility in any kind of cloud service.
And AWS has come a long way in terms of, and again, I'm speaking from a PCI context. PCI at least acknowledges, look, if you're putting stuff in the hands of a third party, make sure you have an acknowledged agreement of, in the context of all the security requirements within PCI, who's doing what. Don't make assumptions. If you think, okay, whatever it is, the requirement is being swept up because you've gone to a third party, in this instance, a cloud provider, make sure that that's understood.
But there's also, now, Lee, there's a standard that I can't think of that it certifies the level of security for cloud providers. I mean, FedRAMP is one thing, but there's another. What is the other standard? I can't think of it now.
Oh, shit. Give me a second.
And it's not just for the cloud provider, but it's also for the cloud. Like, I'm running my application in a cloud service. I can go for a certain level of certification to say like how secure I am in that cloud. What is that? I can't think. I'm just having a mental blank. There's people in their cars and jogging and stuff that are like screaming at us right now. Yeah.
While you're thinking of it, let me complete my picture and the concern where this Ubiquiti thing, I think, at least in part, is
it ties in. Agreed.
The I'm seeing in the clients I've had in the last year or so, you've got a retailer, a merchant. They're somebody engaging in commerce, and they collect credit card information. So they're on the hook for PCI. But they're e-commerce, so they have their website, their e-commerce site, hosted in an AWS environment. And oh, by the way, they've got a third party that does the application development and maintenance and keeps the website up. They're engaging with a payment processor like a Stripe that provides the checkout, the payment function that's separate from the main website potentially. And it so you've got application developers, it's a third party. The checkout, the actual payment function, the transaction function, third party. It's all hosted at a third party. And then you've got the merchant, and then maybe one or two other players. And what I'm seeing is, okay, this can get really confusing really quickly in terms of who's responsible for what, because PCI at the end of the day is asking for basic security table stakes in terms of is somebody monitoring, scanning, keeping current the things that are being done to present this whole e-commerce application. And it gets very confusing very quickly is who's responsible for what. Not that it's impossible to sort out, but it's complicated, and too often I think companies buy into the promise of, oh, if I just outsource to a third party, I can wash my hands and it all goes away.
But it depends on the third party too, because Amazon, Microsoft, Google are one kind of different beast, right? But the way that Ubiquiti, in the sense of IoT gear, they very well could be hosted on Amazon, but they've got their own implementation of how they're doing cloud security in addition to device security, and that seems where it fell down. Like if you were a merchant, for example, and you're like, hey, we're going to run Ubiquiti, it's Ubiquiti's problem for security. Like Amazon's doing, let's just say Amazon's doing the greatest job in the world, but Ubiquiti's using it wrong. But then now I'm even downstream from that, and I'm a merchant that I bought a point of sale system from and it implements Ubiquiti. Like, who's at fault? What do I need to do? Jeff, I think that's the crux of kind of your...
well, that's what I'm trying to get at. It's part of it is who's at fault. Part of it is who's liable, and that's not always the same entity.
Right. And who should own up to what? And it sounds like Ubiquiti wasn't owning up to it.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the big one out of this is that Ubiquiti's not really owning up to a whole hell of a lot.
They're trying to sweep stuff under the rug, which is why whistleblower comes forward and is like, no, like this breach was bad. Like we shouldn't have just advised people change their password. We should have enforced people change their passwords. We should have disclosed way more because attackers were, it sounded like from this article, attackers were all up in their shit, basically.
Well, I want to throw out this. Sorry, Larry.
No, go ahead.
And I'll shut up and let other people talk. I hear what they're saying about bad, but I think it's my interpretation. It's more potential bad. Yes, the hackers were in their shit, but it was more, like we as security professionals see all the bad that could happen because of what is there. I don't know that it's all necessarily happening or was happening, but it was certainly. 20 years ago, it was like, oh my God, I've got root to this, server. Anything goes, I'm root, and try to explain to that to people that had no idea what that means.
Full read-write access to Ubiquiti databases at AWS.
Yep, which you could potentially mean that you've got read-write access on every single one of their remote management products. Yeah, I'm guessing.
But Ubiquiti was saying it's a third party to Ubiquiti. So, Jeff, this is why I love your example, right? Because you've got Amazon as the cloud provider. You've got Ubiquiti as a customer to Amazon. I'm a customer of a point-of-sale system. That point-of-sale system is a customer to Ubiquiti. Ubiquiti then is a partnership of some kind or customer to a third party. You're spot on, Jeff. Like, whose responsibility is this? Who needs to own up to it? What is going on?
Well, and this is the essence of what the issues are, what the potential issues are, and it's not really a technical security issue. I mean, we can drill down and understand exactly what happened and where and who was on the hook for it, but translating that into who's ultimately responsible or liable, and there's a difference also between who's liable and the court of public opinion, because we're talking about Ubiquiti. We're not talking about somehow AWS let one of their customers and all their S3 buckets gave up all the access to it. Yeah. I mean, maybe I'm not saying it is, but maybe it was something on AWS's side. Maybe it was something on
a third party to Ubiquiti. Yeah. I mean, we pointed out some Ubiquiti vulnerability. Who was the SANS? It was the SANS person.
John Gornflow.
Yeah. They came on and was talking about Ubiquiti. And the founder of Ubiquiti left Cisco or something, right, to create Ubiquiti? Or there was some story that I had not had the background to. I forgot. The founder, he talked about the story behind the founder of Ubiquiti. And look, Ubiquiti makes great gear. We all love Ubiquiti, embrace their technology. I think
I just need them to embrace security now.
I think we've all kind of had those red flags, like some security things, like here and there.
There's some issues with this. Like, think about what they had access to outside of like, okay, yeah, we can change all of our passwords. We can reset those. We can put 2-factor on. What about the downloads for firmware? Who's checking the backend code? Is there anything been changed in source code? Do we have firmware that we have to worry about now? Do we need to be looking at our updated flashes? Like, what's the long-term persistence if this is how they're dealing with security? Like, there's a lot of ramifications that are making me like, I'm bought into the ecosystem. So now how do I handle the threat landscape from a supply chain?
Yep.
I think, see, if it's me and I've got access to Ubiquiti, I'm going after what that feature is called in Ubiquiti that lets you grab packets.
Yeah.
What is that feature called? I haven't bought it yet. But there's a feature where like you can have your access points essentially grab traffic. And like Cisco and Meraki like all had this, and we used to use it for troubleshooting. But in Ubiquiti, it's a feature.
It's AirWatch. It's Air Beacon. I'm trying to remember what Ubiquiti.
Ubiquiti calls it something different. You're right. Cisco, it was AirWatch.
Yep.
And you could get the raw 802.11 frames as well as the TCP/IP frames from it. That to me is like basically I hack Ubiquiti's database, I get access to customers, and now I can sniff all their Wi-Fi networks. That's bad. That's the worst case scenario.
In any case, some things that drive me kind of nuts about this one is I use Ubiquiti at home. Right? Oh, go change passwords.
I have for like a long time.
And then of course what happens is you go into the interface. It's like, oh, there's updates available for your access points.
Always updates.
And you know what I immediately want to do? I want to press the update button, and I realize at the time I'm on a Zoom call for work when I'm doing this.
The kids are distance learning.
And the kids are both distance learning, and I'm like,
we talked about that with, what was his name? John
Garflow. Yep. So there's that.
Larry, are you saying you're not patching on a regular basis?
No, because like I got a maintenance window I got to live with.
Exactly. And right now, I got a maintenance window, and like if it was just me and Kristen grabbing coupons or something, like who cares? But like one of the kids is on distance learning on Google Meet all day long, and so it's not going to happen.
But not only you were in a call, but those of us working from home have this wholeheartedly. You got younger ones at home, and like they're watching their iPad quietly while you're on the Zoom call. Like this is totally a thing. And you're like, if I take down the network, not only going to lose my Zoom call, but now my kid's going to be like, oh, I don't have access to the internet. And like, can I have a snack? Can I have a drink? Can we go for a walk?
Can I go outside?
And like, I got to get back on my call.
Yep. So the other challenge that I've got, which I'm not looking forward to, is for 617. We haven't been in the classroom in a year.
You guys use Ubiquiti to build that class.
We use Ubiquiti as an instructor
because it's good shit.
Because it's good shit, and it can handle what we need to do for student load. Not only that, is I can manage it remotely. For example, when we first deployed it,
the cloud's a feature.
Well, exactly. Because when we first deployed it, we had the Cloud Key Management, and it's a little bit older stuff, but it works great. Cloud Key Manager, and there was a misconfiguration in one of the networks that James was teaching about, and I caught it before he touched the module, and I fixed it before he even knew it was a problem. And now I can keep an eye on the gear while somebody else is teaching the class and all this stuff.
The Cloud Keys are basically Linux IoT devices that help you manage your stuff.
So I have 3 of these kits that are in Pelican cases in my basement, and they haven't been turned on in a year.
Oh, you got a lot of updating to do, my friend.
But
you know that.
The problem is that I don't want to take them out, and we may not use them again.
Yeah.
So,
oh crap.
Yeah.
In our first segment, Nick Percoco made a statement about how Kraken. They like to sometimes think about how they're kind of a security company that happened to do
cryptocurrency,
blockchain,
cryptocurrency exchange, and my thought then was, that's not necessarily a good thing because security companies, in my experience, aren't always the most secure, and in fact, sometimes they're most. They have some egregious.
Yeah, it's like the cobbler in his children's shoes, right?
Covers kids always have the worst shoes. Right?
So here we're talking about Ubiquiti, and you guys are going on and on about, oh, we love it, it's great, it's good stuff. We're all security professionals, and we swear by Ubiquiti, and yet Ubiquiti's got these. It's not that they have these technical issues. It's how they're handling it.
Yes,
I mean,
agreed, Jeff. Because it's from a third party. It's about disclosure. It's about properly handling vulnerabilities and breach disclosure. And
they're owning their shit.
yeah,
Yep.
Right.
And some of the other ones too that we talk about how deep that this stuff went. We're having a discussion on a Slack channel that I'm in with some an unofficial Slack channel for some folks, and you go and look at security trails. And the number of subdomains registered at UI.com for Ubiquiti. And the total is 38,614 subdomains registered.
is that because you can get a custom subdomain?
I don't think so.
Interesting, because they say there are
It was from
85
back in the
million.
day, you could get a custom one that would let you publicly look at your network and or provide real-time infrastructure access in a snapshot view. Think of like the old football stadiums. They have some Ubiquiti stuff. They used to provide that, glamour URL that would allow you to access some of the real-time statistics of that.
They
Now,
said
I don't
that,
think that had stuff in there, but
Krebs says Ubiquiti shipped more than 85 million devices that play a key role in networking infrastructure in over 200 countries and territories worldwide.
Yeah.
So clearly we're not the only ones in the hacker community that like Ubiquiti stuff.
Yeah. So I mean, I look at some of these that are off the first list in security trails, and there's stuff in here that's like anti-cert serve us.anaheim.blog.dev UI, plano.ov.blog.dev UI. Sorry,
that sounds like
vpn.plano.
subdomain takeovers. What that sounds like.
Well, it also says the attackers provided proof of stolen Ubiquiti source code and disclosed it, and they wanted 50 Bitcoin, which is $2.8 million.
Yeah, so
Tyler knows those numbers very well because
antivirus.anaheim.blog.dev.
Did you say you have 200 Bitcoin on a wallet somewhere, Tyler?
Sexyass.blog.hugetits.blog. Wait,
Get it. No, hold on. Go back. Did you say you had 200 Bitcoin somewhere?
100.
It's between 100 and 200.
So 50 Bitcoin in the Krebs article that was posted yesterday says 50 Bitcoin is $2.8 million.
So we'll shoot low and say there's $5 million on that damn jump drive somewhere.
Jesus.
So Tyler, what are you
You're gonna
doing this
have a
weekend,
lot of
buddy?
Why aren't you looking for?
You know, there's 4 of us that are gonna fly out, Tyler,
Seriously.
and then we're each gonna get $1 million basically when we find it. Is that
I
a
don't
deal?
have to fly. I'll just drive.
I'm in.
That's a great deal.
I'm in.
I'll drive over. We'll be
I
there
mean,
in-
worst case is the 5 of us get to hang out for a week, right?
Now,
That would be
now,
Sounds like a good plan.
now, my question is, Tyler, do you remember the password for the wallet?
That may be another problem, but I have a pretty good idea.
Okay, so and just because if we find the drive, and
Yeah, we find it and then tell us like, shit, I can't
It's
remember the
password 123.
one.
no, knowing
2,
Tyler, it's
3,
probably 64 characters in length.
Joshua.
Oh my God! Speaking of Joshua, totally off tangent here, but Josh Wright stopped by the other
Love
day.
Josh, right? How's he doing? I haven't.
He's doing great.
We need to bring him into the studio.
He's doing some project for his degree program at RISD in photography, and he's got this crazy, amazing, neat project.
It's funny. We were just talking about like hackers in our community that have these hobbies that we apply our hacking kind of like persona and culture to.
So-
like in like.
So
you know,
this-
Dave Kenny loves smoking meat. And now he loves working out, and Josh loves photography. And,
Now for Josh, the photography between the geekiness and the
there's
the
a-
old
there's a-
time,
yeah.
there's an intersection there.
Yeah.
Because specifically, he took 2 photographs of me, and it was one photograph with my mask on and one photograph with my mask off, using a modern camera that was built in 1990. But the lens from a camera that was from around 1880.
Wow. So he's hacking stuff together. Yeah.
Using dry glass plate film.
It's amazing.
So like the old
I
school,
don't know what that is, but it sounds
the old
amazing.
school ones where they have that squeeze box that comes
Yeah,
in and out,
yeah.
and you have to put the black thing over your head. That's how he took the picture.
It's amazing.
So, and the point being is that he's using the technology that was used for taking photographs during the last pandemic of the Spanish flu.
That's amazing.
Of people now in the current. Either way, he came over, and as part of that, he'd been doing the COVID purge, and he had boxes upon boxes of gear. He said, "Do you want this?" And I'm like,
Yep.
"Yeah." And as I'm unboxing,
Dude, the COVID purge is real, because you go to donation centers sometimes in the past year, and they're like, we're not accepting anymore.
Yeah.
Like, so many people are cleaning out.
We had the same thing. We waited 6 months before we went and donated stuff because that was the case. But these boxes that he gave me have all this incredibly useful gear. And as I'm going through it, I'm like, holy shit. I remember that, because I remember that from that slide that he did in this presentation of, like, this stuff needs to be set dressing.
Yeah.
Like, do you remember the Banap project?
I do. I remember the name. What was that?
So it was the discovery of Bluetooth BD adders, the Bluetooth MAC addresses, by doing some sniffing, looking for the first set of significant addresses. Because if you want to do discovery of non-discoverable devices, you need the upper address portion, the lower address portion. You don't need the first set, the insignificant. So he was trying to effectively brute force by finding out what was up there for all of those upper address portions by just sniffing Bluetooth. And he has a picture on a slide of this USB hub with these wireless adapters plugged into it. I have the hub with all of the wireless adapters plugged into it exactly as it was in that photograph. Like,
so cool.
There's... Like, we talk about this section in the RFID stuff in the SANS course. And it's like, oh yeah, if you hack this lock and this door lock from this thing, and I'm like, the door lock's in the box. Like, right there from this.
Sweet. Anyway.
We need some set dressing.
Ubiquiti, anyone else want to weigh in? Like,
So,
Lee.
So I was actually thinking, you're talking about the issue of whose throat do you choke? Only you didn't use that term. And I was thinking, when you've got somebody set up, when you set up that contract, did you let them take out the indemnification clauses? Did you have the flow down on security requirements so you actually can go after the third party or not? I mean, it's still a battle, but I've been involved with some contract stuff in my day job, and vendors don't like it when there's they don't want any risk of downward flow to them. They'd
or
like
upward
to remove
flow,
those
depending
clauses.
as the case may be.
But it begs the question, and I this week, looking at evaluating technology and solutions, like what do you do? And there's functional requirements, there's operational requirements, there's security requirements. And I just, at this point, to me, it's amazing.
And then there's PCI.
And then there's regulatory requirements as well, Jeff. It's a great point, and they all factor into what has become a really complex decision. Like, do we buy something off the shelf? Do we partner with someone? Do we build it all ourselves? But then there's all those places in between. And I'm like, so do we build the front end application and then use a cloud provider in the back end? And we end up in all these different decision points. And how much responsibility do you want to own? What do you? And I think what really, for me, seals the deal is what are we comfortable with? Where's our comfort zone? Maybe we got some developers and we know we can own this piece, and this piece is owned by the cloud provider, and maybe we don't want to partner because Excellion and all these other cases and SolarWinds, maybe we don't want to partner because there's supply chain issues. But
it boils down to, Paul. I mean, those are all. I want to validate and affirm you. Those are all very important considerations. But at the end of the day, it boils down to what's the most cost-effective, e.g., cheapest way to get
cost
there.
Is a huge factor. Huge.
And it reminds me, when I was back, actually in the first office that I worked in at NSA, I worked with, several people that were in the armed forces, a couple Army guys, a couple Air Force guys. One of the Army guys brought in one time these aphorisms, these slogans that are common and humorous in terms of army life, and one of them was, and I think it's appropriate here, when you're in a firefight, never forget that your M16 was built by the lowest bidder.
Yep. It's true.
Let that sink in.
Yeah, let that sink into cybersecurity, right? Ubiquiti uses third party because they made that decision that many of us have made that is more, to your point, Jeff, right? Maybe the driving factor was it was more cost effective to go get that third party, have them provide that service and or product or both than it was to build it ourselves and or kind of put those pieces off. Today I'm finding I can use that cloud provider for that cloud native service and I got to just build this piece versus building it myself versus buying the whole thing or anywhere else in between.
Right. Well, and it's interesting, and I admit that I'm an old fart. In the time of isolation because of COVID, my wife and I have been binge watching various shows, and it's a show that probably other people have watched already. But one of the shows we've been watching is The Blacklist, and the episode.
I haven't seen that one. But yeah,
the episode that we watched yesterday had to do with this. I forget the name of the person, the episode number, but it was a person that was doing statistical analysis. He was doing mathematical formulas to determine who should live and who should die, and it was fascinating. And I'm like, I like this guy, and my wife's like, oh, he's evil. I'm like, no, but he's like taking a logical approach to. You've got this scenario, this scenario.
You are now the second person that's recommended, Jeff, that you should watch this. And it was one of those. I haven't gotten to it because I'm totally, I'm now 4 seasons deep into a 6-season show, and we're almost done.
Sounds like a better thought-provoking than Cobra Kai, because my family watches Cobra Kai, which it's hilarious in our house because there's 3 of us in our house that are watching Cobra Kai, and we're all kind of flopping back and forth because, like, my middle son will just watch a whole season, and I'm like, dude, like, you're not waiting for us. And so we're all different. But, like, I'm watching Cobra Kai, and I'm like, so, like, pretty much table stakes, every episode there's a karate fight.
Yep.
I get that.
Fair enough.
I get that. There's usually a flashback to one of the original Karate Kid movies or reference to it in every episode.
Yep.
Relationships are destroyed in some like bizarre, weird way.
Or built in some bizarre, weird way.
That could never happen in that succession in real life. Statistically, that would never happen. And high occurrence of vandalism. Usually something's being vandalized.
And Coors Banquet.
And Coors Banquet. A lot of Coors Banquet. Like more Coors Banquet than I've ever seen in my entire life.
But despite the little Cobra Kai tangent, the point I'm trying to make is that, for all of the news and media coverage and all the things that we talk about, pragmatically, it all boils down to a financial decision.
Yeah,
and right or wrong, you can argue, and I certainly would be one to argue the ethics of, is money really the only thing that matters? But pragmatically, most of the time in our world, money is the only thing that matters. So, if you kind of start there, you can make your opinions based on that. So Ubiquiti, my concern about them is not their technology. It is to some degree where the failure was. We all want to know what went wrong and how did it happen. But to me, it's more intriguing that they're trying to throw everybody else under the bus and deflect and point fingers and it's almost it's gaslighting as far as I'm concerned.
Well, you wonder what regulation could bring to say that if you are a publicly traded company, what is your responsibility for breach disclosure? Should that be treated differently, separately? Should it be blanket breach disclosure? I think leaving it to the states, in my opinion, is a bad idea because then we've got dozens and dozens of different breach disclosure laws, some that have it, some that do, and then they're all different. Should it be federal? Should it be different for publicly traded companies? But the article ends with like how their stock is doing, right? I mean, their stock has gone up this year, and did they protect and sweep under the rug this breach because their stock is doing well? And of course, their stock is going to do well. Everyone's working from home. Everyone's buying Wi-Fi gear. I mean, of course, their stock is going to do well.
Yeah,
but that's the ultimate irony is that you're saying that and you're highlighting that in one way that it's all about the finances.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, you've got all the deflection. You've got the who did what, who's liable, who's responsible, court of public opinion, and by the time we're done arguing it, it's like, well, what was the issue in the first place?
Yeah, would their stock price really?
I mean,
maybe it takes a dip, but tell your
That's...
users, look, change all your passwords, encourage 2-factor authentication, disclose what happened in the breach. like people are going to still use Ubiquiti. Like, we've always said with breaches, like, give some transparency. When you start to be deceitful, I think that further erodes trust, but it erodes trust largely with us hackers and cybersecurity folks, maybe not with the
But does
people who
it
are buying.
really, if you measure trust as how well are you doing in the stock market?
I think trust is how well you're willing to be transparent and disclose what happened.
But what I'm saying is, from a business perspective, I can see them saying, and I'm not defending anybody. I'm just, this is just the pragmatism. Who cares?
Yeah.
Who cares if we're trustworthy as long as our stock
I see what you're saying. Like from business to business, our trust in Ubiquiti is still strong because financially they're a strong company. Therefore, it's not as much risk if we make an investment in that company because their financial performance is good.
Well, and to tie it back to our previous interview with Rob, I am often concerned that a lot of we talk about FUD all the time.
Mm-hmm.
FUD. We all know that FUD isn't the way that you do security, and yet so much of our industry is based on FUD, including, not to pick on Rob in particular, but just generically, we have this whole industry of reporting and news and media, whether it's tied to marketing and PR programs, and we've got the solution, our product will take care of you. It all revolves around FUD. I mean, even this article, again, it wasn't that Ubiquiti. Sorry, I've been drinking too much. Ubiquiti was actually compromised, and the hackers and bad guys were actually stealing everybody's credentials and then going out and accessing all their Ubiquiti customers, products, Wi-Fi products, to go reap, all sorts of havoc on God knows what. It's the potential. I mean, that's FUD. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, that's FUD.
Tyler, I want to get your thoughts. You've been one of the huge proponents of Ubiquiti. You dumping all your Ubiquiti gear, or?
That's the hard part, right? Like, this is something that we've went back to as consumers in order to force change upon products or manufacturers, then they have to see or feel it. I don't foresee me changing any of my habits, although it does cause me a pause on, like, how robust and reliable are the things that are underlying in my network. If my network design's great, if I've got all the stuff I need, and firmware gets popped or a backdoor gets introduced via source code, like, what is my ability to protect against that? And this is a common supply chain attack issue that most corporations are facing today. So I don't think I'll change my products because I still believe in them and I think they're the best out there. But this does make me really hope that there's some leadership change and they start to hear some of the voices that are, letting them know this is not how they should do business.
I'd feel better if they were more transparent.
Me too.
Yeah. Right. And I think that's the message that we'd like to send to Ubiquiti is that,
I mean,
no one's 100% resilient. Like, that's,
No.
So if you had something, just tell us and we'll adapt, right?
Right.
Especially
no, we're
when
not.
it's
And what we tend to value, I'm sorry, Tyler, what we tend to value is the companies that are, they're just open book, full disclosure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we screwed up. We made a mistake. It was stupid. We found the person that did it and fired him because you have to have a scapegoat. Somebody has to go to jail. Kidding. But we tend to like the companies that just own it. We all know that it's gonna, the law of averages is averages. It's going to happen to all of us at some point. All of us are going to fall victim. All of us are going to be in this spotlight, and it's really how you react and respond is what you
agreed
is what you really fall down on and really what you point to. So in that context, Ubiquiti doesn't seem to be doing too well.
Yeah.
So Tyler,
but what's scary?
Ask the question to Tyler again.
What's scary is that now if you got a pfSense firewall, are you in the same boat? Yeah.
You are.
Right? Because the way I understand the story is that WireGuard's a cool project, right?
Yes.
Jeff, to your area of expertise, they're implementing encryption and cryptography in creating this VPN protocol, and they called it WireGuard. They were very forthcoming.
If they're doing crypto, then all the problems are solved.
Right. But I think they've been very, in WireGuard's defense, WireGuard has been very transparent that, like, look, we're trying to build this and make it more resilient. Like, don't go jumping on our stuff thinking it's the most secure thing on the planet, because we're trying to build something and we want more scrutiny. I think they've done a good job at the WireGuard project for that. Now, WireGuard was built into the Linux system.
And the Linux kernel.
And Linux kernel, and I think also OpenBSD. And they said, we want to support...
it was not built into the OpenBSD kernel.
I thought one of the OpenBSD developers was one of the ones that helped fix this because he had experience building it into OpenBSD.
This is where one of the OpenBSD stories comes in.
Interesting. All right, so we'll table that. It was built in the Linux kernel.
Yep.
We can say that. pfSense was like, hey, we want to build this into the FreeBSD kernel.
Okay, maybe I've screwed up Open versus FreeBSD.
Yeah, so because pfSense is FreeBSD based, and they wanted to hire this developer to go do it. That developer, holy crap, that's a whole story in and of itself, and we'll get to that. Basically, the developer screwed it up, and pfSense took the pre-releases beta code from this developer, started building it into releases of pfSense. The maintainers of WireGuard looked at that and was like
WTF.
Holy crap, that is some crap-ass code. Rewrote it.
Rewrote it.
Rewrote it.
Rewrote it well.
Rewrote it well with one of the OpenBSD developers, with one of the WireGuard developers, and one other developer that had experience.
Lee's got a comment in there.
Go ahead, Lee.
I said it was Donefeld, who was one of the WireGuard development. I was looking for the other guy who was from FreeBSD, but the two of them spent a week just cranking out fixed code.
A lot of energy drinks and sleepless nights and cranked it up. Basically rewrote, the article said that I read, they rewrote every line of code basically because it was crap. And came up with this release for FreeBSD. pfSense is kind of like now just running like air cover. Like basically like they put all their eggs in the basket of whatever
this one developer.
This one developer.
Whatever his name was.
Turns out this developer has a criminal record, went through some tough times. It admits they didn't put like his best effort into it, and now this whole kind of fight. And I remember actually seeing a couple of weeks ago pfSense posting some articles and me not fully understanding the story until this week, where I'm like, oh, this is how this all played out.
Kip Macy was the developer.
Kip Macy was the developer.
Right. And Kit Macy had changed his professional persona because of his past. So actually, to find the work he's done that's relevant in the past, you have to look for somebody else.
Right. His quote alter ego, or I don't know what the whole thing was, but there was some part where he like legally changed his name from something else to Kip Macy. And all of his previous work had been under the previous name because the previous name was the one that had been to prison.
Kip Macy was the one that was the landlord from hell.
Yes.
They'd gotten some trouble with the law for the way he treated his
tenants on a building that they had purchased in San Francisco.
Sawing holes directly through the floors of tenants' apartments, forging extremely threatening emails, and forcing tenants out.
Yep.
Basically made the building unlivable.
Yep. Oh yeah, they cut the floor joists, and why would you cut the floor joists on a property you bought to get your tenants out?
I mean, in the code that Macy produced, apparently had a laundry list of code quality issues, kernel panic, security bypasses, and just
as they put it, spectacular in air quotes buffer overflows, printf statements deep in crypto code. So like you'd be running this stuff, someone would connect to WireGuard, and like your logs would get spammed full of random
I love
shit.
this. Mazes of Linux to FreeBSD if defs. But just it's just like a dependency friggin' that's coding and dependency nightmare.
I like the validation functions that just return true.
Yep.
Like what the hell?
Oh, what was that? That was on something. That was like on something crazy and important.
It was like the algorithm that said, "Do I have to process this packet or not?" It always returned true, so that makes
just process it. It's fine.
Every packet.
And WireGuard is becoming a pretty solid project for implementing VPN technology. So much so Ubuntu included it in the 20.04 official release of Ubuntu. It's actually in the operating system. in the
Most
distribution. I
VPN
should say.
solutions now support it, like private internet access, ExpressVPN. It's one of the few that can circumvent the Great Wall of China in some capacity.
Oh, so should we process the packet? We didn't attempt to chase down the use of the Well, the only thing that it did was return true, but it appears to be intended to check whether a packet source and or destination belongs to WireGuard's allowed IPs list. That's kind of important.
You think?
That's the one that scared me. Like, that seems like that would cause a lot of problems for a VPN, like, especially if you're trying to, stay under the radar.
Yeah, pfSense has been a great distribution.
I agree. Although, we mentioned many years ago OpenSense.
Yep.
And
there was a feud, a disagreement that spawned OpenSense. Yeah.
Yep. And I haven't gone back and looked at the project, but I think maybe that I need to. I mean, I've got to relook at firewalls after a couple of years, and I've got a spare one, right. and that type of stuff. And I'm thinking maybe OpenSense is potentially the way to go. Just to try something new.
I did some OpenSense stuff.
Yep. And did you go back to?
And I went because for stability.
Really?
And some features, I went back to pfSense. Recently, I've been experimenting a little bit with Firewalla. We interviewed the founder of that project on there. I bought one of his devices, actually. And I'm probably going to cut over to that. Now reading this article, probably sooner than later, because I'm running pfSense at home. Like, just, my OPSEC sucks, but like, we've talked about it on the show. Larry and I both have built pfSense firewalls for certain applications.
And my thing is that the hard one for me is that I just need it to work. And I'm going to get some experience playing with some WireGuard coming up pretty quick here.
Right.
But
I mean, that being said, like, if you're running pfSense and you're keeping up to date, and you're not doing WireGuard on it, you're probably okay, right? Yeah. Like, if you're not implementing it.
I'm not. And quite honestly, the big deal for me is that I do IPsec. And I do IPsec from a bunch of devices, including my iPhone, because I have services that don't work unless it comes from my home. Yep. So you go out to VPN home.
The deal with IPsec, and a lot of us have been around for a long time, it's freaking complicated.
It is, but
WireGuard makes it a lot easier.
But at least now I can go into my iPhone and I can go... network, Wi-Fi, I can go to settings, VPN, and click the button and it connects.
Right.
I haven't played with the WireGuard yet, but like, there's a WireGuard app.
There is, yeah. It's the same thing, like create tunnel, go.
But like, do I have to open I haven't done it yet. Do I have to open the app and click connect, and then I go back to my other stuff?
Yep. You got to open the app, connect. You input your profile with your keys in it, and then click connect. Okay. Same thing. Yep.
Is it really that hard, or is it really just syntax? It's learning a new syntax.
Yes.
It's configuration, Jeff, on the client and the server.
Right. Still syntax.
Syntax.
And the big advantage is speed. WireGuard definitely counts a lot of speed, and obviously there's some privacy things there, but it's just a different way of doing a VPN.
Yep. Hey, my implementation is faster. My validation checks return true.
Yeah. It's kind of concerning. But I don't think it's a black eye on WireGuard, because what I got from this article is the WireGuard developers really care about creating a quality product, and they stepped in and did it the right way.
Yeah,
and pfSense was kind of advocating for, like, we put all our eggs in this other guy's basket, and
I think the big problem was how do we ensure that someone is actually validating this, like the implementation to the BSD stuff.
And you know what? That was Macy's argument, is like, I released this code, I was burned out, I was tired, like, YOLO.
He owned it. You're right.
He owned it. He says, but more importantly, I uploaded this crap to the alpha release and it started to get it implemented. But who's reviewing this shit? Like, clearly there's some issues here, but no one reviewed my shit.
At some point they did.
Well, clearly the WireGuard folks looked at it and went, what the hell is this crap?
But similar to the PHP project, like, they caught that early on.
Yeah.
So I think in both these stories, it is a testament to open source that crap makes it into our code bases, but we catch that stuff. Like, there's people watching, and they're doing the work. I mean, look, they're doing great work in the open source community.
And admittedly, Macy's stuff didn't make it to the mainstream. It was in, like, alpha release, and that's where pfSense was pulling from.
I should say that there has to be people that are doing great work, and the people that are doing mediocre or crappy work there's a balance that the people that are doing great work looking after the project are like, oh no, we're not going to let that happen. Like, it makes to a certain point people catch it, right? What scares me more,
how do we validate closed source?
but what scares me more is like the people maintaining the pseudocode, right, that has that vulnerability we talked about that, is years and years and years has been in there, and they're doing great work too, but those are kind of more scary for me, right? Like introducing a whole new feature sets like we're talking about in the context of WireGuard and FreeBSD and in PHP, they can catch that stuff. It's the code that's already been written and committed that security researchers are doing an amazing job of stringing 2 or 3 vulnerabilities together to get code execution, and the maintainer who's a total ninja like Todd C. Miller of sudo's like, crap, like I didn't catch that, and his credit, fixed it immediately. Those are the bugs that worry me more, for sure, because there's so many other code bases and libraries that are in high usage and haven't come under scrutiny. And the scary part for me is you can have really competent people maintaining those projects, but also really competent security researchers that are looking at it in a different light.
Yeah.
That's kind of scary.
Yeah. What's kind of a shame to me is they spent all that work fixing that WireGate code for the FreeBSD release, and then it all got pulled.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, because they got nervous, right? But
right.
I mean,
I think the good stuff will be back.
Oh yeah, because obviously there's talented enough engineers that can go do that, right? And hopefully, what was his name that wrote the bad code? Learn from that experience. Yep. Macy learned from that experience, and hopefully write better code.
So, based on sort of what I was seeing at the beginning of that article that I was reading, was that he probably will learn, but he probably won't do that again. Because, like, my understanding, it was like contract work. He was already burned. He was already burnt. No, he was already burnt out. Like, he was basically, he had a deadline to meet. He didn't want to do it to begin with.
Yeah. That's what it sounded like. Yep.
And like, hopefully, the lesson that he learns there is that don't take on more than you can chew. Like, don't take more than you can bite off, and like, learn to use your no.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. That's the lesson, Larry. You're absolutely right. And I think many of us on the show and listening have been in that situation where sometimes we're wise enough to be like, no.
Yeah.
And other times we take on more, we bite off more than we can chew, and we're like, crap, we should have said no.
Yep.
And I think one of the tips I have for people in that situation is know when to ask for help. Like maybe Macy should have been in that situation and been like,
to quote him, I didn't even want to do this work. I was burned out, spent many months with post-COVID syndrome. I'd suffered through years of verbal abuse from non-doers and semi-non-doers, whatever those are. And in the project whose one big one-up on me is that they aren't felons. I jumped at the opportunity to leave the project in December. I just felt a moral obligation to get the WireGuard port over the finish line. So you have to forgive me if my final efforts were a bit half-hearted.
Know when to ask for help.
Yeah,
I think it's one of that would be my recommendation.
Know when to ask for help. Know when to use your no.
Yep.
Yeah. And
positive thing, there are folks that are watching this stuff and making these fixes.
Yep.
I think again, the scary side is when stuff like this does make it into the mainstream open source code.
Yep.
Which is a great transition to NPM Netmask package.
Yep. And I've got a fun one that'll be a quick one to cover that I think will be good for all of us.
You've got some awesome ones in there too. I mean, this was other big news this week. Basically, the Netmask Npm project used by 270,000 plus projects, vulnerable to octal input data. It sounds ambiguous when you think about it. Like basically, if you're trying to filter for SSRF vulnerabilities, and you want to say like, hey, you can go to external stuff, but you can't go to localhost, it circumvents that filtering. Is the best way I can at this point in the evening. This is the best way I can think to describe that. But it's interesting because it works in both ways too. Like if you're trying to limit to local, you can also use this to also step outside of that. Basically, it's the interpretation of an IP address as either octal or decimal. The way NPM was doing it was just to drop the leading 0 and interpret it as all as decimal. Turns out that's really bad. It allows for bypasses in both directions. When I read these articles multiple times over, it was my best kind of summation of that.
Well, and dropping the leading 0 and treating it as decimal doesn't even make sense. So, like in the example, you have 0177.0.0.1 was interpreted as 127.0.0.0.1.
The way I believe it should work, and it's a brain teaser.
Yeah.
So if you ping 0127.0.0.1, it interprets that 0127 as octal, converts it to 87.0.0.1, which is an internet routable IP address. So in that,
so if you ping 0177.0.0.1, it as octal 0177
goes to 127.
127. Okay.
Right. Like I said, it works in kind of both directions.
Yep.
Like whether you've got an app that's filtering, like you can only have this parameter be external IP addresses, or this parameter should only be internal IP addresses. Like you can basically trick it in either direction.
So what I'm gathering here, based on the discussion, if it had a leading 0, it was interpreted as octal, as opposed to decimal.
It should be interpreted as octal. But however, in the Netmask code, it was basically stripping that leading 0.
Right. Got it.
But interpreting a leading 0 at all implies it's not looking at it, help me out, programmers, as an integer. It's more of a character. I mean, what variable allows for the interpretation of a leading 0? I guess that's my question.
So the root cause of the problem was Netmask incorrect evaluation of individual IP4 octets that contained octal strings as left stripped integers, leading to an inordinate attack surface on hundreds of thousands of projects that rely on Netmask to filter or evaluate IPv4 block ranges inbound and outbound. Also, the original vulnerability disclosure, I read from that as well. A remote unauthenticated attacker can request local resources using input data 0177.0.0.1 as 127.0.0.1, which Netmask evaluate to the public IP of 177.0.1. Contrastingly, remote authenticated or unauthenticated attacker can input data 0127.0.0.0.1 as 87.0.0.1 as local host, yet the input data is the public IP, causing remote file inclusion, LFI or RFI attacks.
Yeah, and Jeff, I get where you're getting. Like, what? How are you defining the string to have it drop or process the leading 0?
Right. I mean,
this was my most difficult article to explain on the podcast. It really is.
Isn't an octal?
I know.
Isn't it an implied 0x? 127?
No, that would be hex.
That's hex.
0x would be hex. I don't think
it sounds like a coding error in terms of what the type of the variable is.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And I've had way too much bourbon to try to figure it out.
And Jeff, I don't have the answer, but I know exactly where you're going.
You know what I'm talking about, right?
Exactly. So I think about this to my RFID days and the Proxmark. If you read a tag with the Proxmark, and at least in one of the types of tags, if it's the unique identifier starts with a 0. So I think back to 617 because we have an example of it. If the tag is 0625, printed on the tag itself, and you read it, the output says it's 625, not 0625.
Right.
Because it strips the leading 0 because, well, yeah.
So for octal notation, you're supposed to escape backtick the leading 0, whereas hex it's a backtick of a backslash of the leading x. In other words, you escape it.
Yep.
And that's the indicator. So they're not checking for the escape. So it basically causes it to be interpreted. X07 versus 007, but you need an escape to tell it that this is not just a leading zero.
It's actually intriguing because A, I've been drinking, and B, when you think of like the OWASP top 10 and common ways that web applications are exploited in terms of the leading, making sure you're bounding your variables and not allowing 5,000 characters to be input into a field that you think you're only going to have 10 characters or something like that. But who thinks about the leading characters? That's an interesting problem.
Yeah. And
I
was actually just messing around with the old BC tool, the basic calculator in Linux, and if you tell it the input base is 8 and you take 0177 and say plus 0, it'll give you back 127. It's a real easy way to do a conversion.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was real obvious what they were doing. They were clearly interpreting it as octal if you had a leading 0. But boy, was that wrong.
Whoops.
But the standing question, Lee, is what variable is
what's the variable
attempting to
declaration
interpret as an octal, it even considers it might be an octal.
Right.
I want to transition from the tech because I know we're late in the show and this was the wrong time to bring up this story. I do want to give a shout out to Darknet Diaries. I know, Jeff, you were in a fairly recent episode. Jack has interviewed the grumpy old hackers. He's done a couple of episodes with them.
Wait, are you calling me a grumpy old hacker?
No, different grumpy
that was a
old
different
hacker.
episode.
I was going to say, no, Darknet Diaries did.
So Victor Gevers is someone who heads up the GDI Foundation, where basically like he finds vulnerabilities on the internet.
The GDI, goddammit?
And no, not that one,
Okay.
but they are like Dutch hackers, but they are responsible for identifying the authentication and password heinous misuses in Trump's Twitter account, both in 2016 and in 2020. Jack did a great job of documenting the story and the kind of chronological history of, like, in 2016, they figured out that his password was "you're fired," and then in 2020, like, the saga continued to be like on our saga kind of theme, that the password was MAGA 2020 exclamation point, because that was the same password that they used for the Wi-Fi network in some of the rallies for Trump. Also the same password that they had used for Trump's Twitter account and was able to log in. He got into a lot of trouble for it, and I just want to make sure that we stick up for hackers like Victor, that, or the intention is to make the internet a better place.
Yeah.
It like went through a rough patch, like that would stress any of us out, and came out fortunately in the clear and ahead, but like had to go sit with the Dutch federal authorities and like explain, like, no, like dude, like, I guessed the password, I didn't do anything bad. I tried to contact Trump, I tried to contact the administration, the whole thing, no one responded to me. Like, in the story's awesome, so make sure you go check out that Darknet Diaries.
I would say, and he was lucky that happened in Dutchland. What is that, Denmark? Because he would not necessarily have had a similar experience if that had been the U.S. For example.
He goes on the interview and was like basically, he's like, I was kind of nervous.
I was crapping my pants.
I don't blame you, dude, and I respect you for doing that stuff to make the internet a better place. And he's one of those folks that really commits to that in like an amazing way. So worth a read. It just happened to Victor was one of the other vulnerability disclosure people that on the Netmask one, but different Victor. And I thought it might have been the same Victor, but it wasn't. So
what is your vector, Victor?
What Victor?
Speaking of Victor,
Don't call me Shirley.
The one that I find is kind of fun, because how many of us came from the coming of age of hackers, in that we were beating games and getting more bullets in, Oregon Trail and defeating DRM and
Oregon Trail. They go into that in Steve Levy's book. Hackers Here's the Computer Revolution.
Yep. So Activision forces an online DRM check into their re-release of Crash Bandicoot 4 for modern consoles. in which it needs to check in with battle.net online, even though there's no online content. Within 24 hours of release, a cracking group, Empress, was able to defeat the online check in Crash Bandicoot's for PC version of its online check-in system. 24 hours.
How many millions of dollars did that cost?
Like, I mean, Crash Bandicoot 4, old game, re-release. There probably wasn't a ton of sales, but enough. The big
To have an anti-cheating.
well, it wasn't even anti-cheating. It was
DRM.
It was just DRM to basically confirm that you had bought it for your console, and it would check in with Battle.net. It was like, hey, do we own this? Yeah, I own this. Return true.
Yeah.
But what? We've been there, right? Yeah, just take the function in the DLL and patch it so that it always returns true. Like, it doesn't even go online. It just returns true.
I like how in your article they show like a image of a broken CD.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a throwback.
Totally.
Larry,
And
I loved your story.
Replaced one file, right?
I
Something
pretty
like
much.
that.
I would guess, yeah.
I wanted you to talk about your story number 8 because I thought this was awesome. And Jeff, I don't know if you read this one, but this is basically you show, and it's not even plain text.
Yeah.
Like, it's not a plain text versus ciphertext thing. It's like if you show enough of your key,
Your RSA private key.
you can
That was
basically
a cool
derive the
article.
rest of the key. Which
So-
Jeff, I don't know if you read Larry's story number 8. Larry's story number 8. There's so many angles to this. One,
Yep.
if you're a penetration tester, or really anyone looking into vulnerabilities, and you post publicly, like, don't disclose anything. And this was totally a case where, like, and I can see this happening. You're on a pen test, and you find a private key, and you want to show people, like, it's really bad to have your private key out there. Like, we talked to Nick in the first segment about how, like, your Bitcoin wallet and your cryptocurrency wallets are all, like, based on your key. But, like, if you find someone else's key, like, don't post any of it. And this was a case where a pen tester was like, oh, like
I
score, I got
totally
the key, and I want to post it, but only redacted certain parts of it.
They redacted 31 out of the 51 lines out of the RSA private key.
The telling part for me in this article is where they say the most difficult part of cracking the key
Yes.
was actually doing the OCR to go from the image to actually text, making sure it was good. Deriving the rest of the key is like 20 lines of Python code. Like, not like if that.
Yep, because effectively what I gathered out of this, in the 20 lines of the key that was still there, included enough of the bits for them to recreate the entirety.
Right, to like recreate the rest of the key based on prime numbers. Yes.
They effectively recovered the primes that were used to calculate it because it was there.
Which is amazing. Like, if I have enough of a private key, I can just derive the rest based on math. Essentially is what the article says.
Yeah. And the big one here, the big takeaway that I got from this was that it didn't take them much for them to regenerate the entirety of the key based on the 31 the redacted lines. But the hardest part was the OCR. The OCR,
right.
And the time it took, I'm speculating
like
here.
QA, like I'm going to take the image and go from text, but I want to go back to the image and then verify that I got every character right to get the...
In my opinion is that they probably spent so much time, they went down that rabbit hole of the OCR, and that they spent so much time with the manual tweaks
They could
to get almost perfect, which they still had to validate from the image to the recovery, that if they had just read off, had two people
reading it, yeah.
Like, and I think
I agree, Larry.
I think that is an incredibly valuable lesson to learn, and I see so many people participate in CTFs, specifically the 617 CTF
it's
recently.
really funny.
Is that so many people get down that rabbit hole of like, you give them so many hints, and that hint is like, no, it's over here, and they're like, I'm down this rabbit hole,
but also
and
it's
I
like,
have to go down this rabbit hole.
I could write software or a script to solve this problem, or I could just do it manually. And you're like, hold on, let me calculate the time trade-off. And you're like, if I have to do this more than a couple of times, okay, I'll write the script because I can reuse it, right?
Do you know how many times
But I have to do it like once or twice, like, I'm probably just better off like editing the file manually or copying
do you
and pasting a million times to do it, right?
Do you know how many times I've taken this output file and like, I did... Great one. I've done my sed awk and grep and tr and all the stuff, and I've got it where it's good enough. But for me to write a script to fix the rest of it, it's faster for me to just do it manually. Even though it is 1,000 lines in VI for me to do the keystrokes
create
1,000
VI
times.
macro or just
No, it will take me longer to create the VI macro than it will me to do it manually 1,000 times.
Do the operation once and then hit the period and redo it. It's what is the keystroke? It's like J to go down and hit dot and just do that in all 500 lines. It's quicker for me than to write it.
To this point. Conversation with Josh Wright today. He comes up again. A quotable quote from the discussion today with Josh was, "Just get it good enough and then sed awk tr your way to success."
Totally there with you.
So funny you should mention this. Somebody on Twitter, thinker on Twitter yesterday or the day before posed the question, is it possible to teach people how to create a robust, complex password? And that, you can imagine that launched all sorts of comments. And, somebody talked about, whether there was complexity and they were going into the usual complexity and length and stuff like that. And I simply made the comment that, length is much more important these days than complexity. If you choose enough characters, you're good, just from a brute force perspective. Long story short, that launched a lot of dialogue on Twitter with quite a few different people. But in having this dialogue on Twitter, and I was trying to throw in, but there's cryptanalysis. You're talking about brute force, and there was a lot of math flying around in terms of calculating what it would take to actually break whatever the password based on. We were getting into whether it was character based or word based and passphrase based and so on and so forth. But what I tried to convey, and I think it's pertinent here, is oversimplifying how you break this cryptography. At the end of the day, you've got plain text, you've got a message, you've got data, and you're trying to encrypt it and ultimately produce cipher. And the way you do that is you do some sort of, math algorithm
based on a key.
So very, very simplistically, it's plain text, P plus being, any amount of algorithm, key equals cipher. So if you could think back, you don't have to be a mathematician, and I'm not, but if you think back to algebra and trying to solve equations, and solve the variable, solve for x, if you've got P plus K equals C, and C is the encrypted message, which presumably is out there, it's been broadcast, it's been intercepted. So C, you have C. Ultimately, you're trying to get to P, but in a purist form, there's P and there's K. Those are the two unknowns. You have the C. So where cryptography and cryptanalysis comes into play is trying to take advantage of, do you have a little bit of insight into what P is, and you can figure out K, and then extend that to get more P, or can you figure out
if you take enough K, you get enough P, which gets
you P. It sounds funny, but the Enigma machine, we've talked about that before. Yeah. One of the reasons why the main reason why the Enigma machine was broken was because they started every message, the Germans, with Heil Hitler.
Yeah, so and I will also add, in combination with other phrases in predictable messages, such as the weather, raining, cloudy, snowing, windy.
What you're talking about, guys, it ties into my story number 3 about Alan Turing and my story number 12 about how someone hacked the Chick-fil-A coupon coding system.
Well, your Turing article, we actually talked about that last week. I thought, the fact that he's showing up on the UK currencies, the 50-pound note or whatever.
I do think that Security Boulevard did a great job in quoting a bunch of articles, and I think that the quote that resonated with me was, "It's a way to let the UK honor historic people, but don't pretend it's some big feat or victory for oppressed people. Pardoning and putting him on a note doesn't undo that."
No,
I thought it was really succinct and resonated with me.
Yeah, and we talked about that last week. The fact that does it make up for the fact that he was basically castrated and because it was illegal to be homosexual. I mean, there's a lot of issues there.
Right.
But Jeff,
go back to your point on the codes, right? I mean, basically, we're talking about code breaking.
Cipher breaking.
But my story number 12 is more about, I think, code breaking than an actual cipher, where someone was trying to. I mean, they're basically trying to commit fraud to say, like, I can get a free something at a retailer if I can figure out the coupon code, and found great success in looking at Chick-fil-A. But I thought was interesting, I looked at Google Images to find multiple receipts to get the code that allows you to then go take a survey that allows you to go get the coupon code to get a free sandwich. And they broke down the code into the digits. Like the first sequence is 7 digits. And out of the 7 digits, it was only this random. In the 4 through 6 digits, the first sequence will always be 0. And then preceded by X, basically they found the pattern in the code to be able to develop a system that allowed them to allow people to get free sandwiches at Chick-fil-A. What I also thought was interesting is the great article, go read it, it's my story number 12.
Yep.
But at the end, they basically say the journalist that was like investigating this says communications with the person who committed this fraud, and they said, hey, it's been a while, but Sammy just got a cease and desist letter from Chick-fil-A and now has to pay restitution for all of the free sandwich codes. Like, basically Sammy the hacker was getting all the free sandwich codes and then reselling them for like $2 where a sandwich is $4. That hacker, or air quotes hacker, criminal, has to pay restitution. And my whole thing is like, crime doesn't pay until you have to pay restitution.
Yep.
And if you look at the restitution the criminals have to pay, it's very, like, they have to pay back all the money, sometimes plus damages. Like, crime literally doesn't pay in all of these instances when you get caught.
When you get caught.
So if you get caught. But what you see is the theme.
That's called a risk assessment.
Yes. Yeah. But what you see in this article and many others about criminals, and we can even limit this to cyber, is like you get greedy. You're like, wait, how can I make more money? How can I make this bigger and more profitable? And they get greedy and they want to increase the payments. I think Max Vision, a lot of the payment card, Jeff, to PCI, a lot of the credit card fraud is about, like, I'm not happy with making $1,000 a week. I want to make $50,000 a week. I want to, they get greedy with that.
They think they're businessmen and they know how to scale something.
So, from this article, Paul, I think the analysis was amazing, and this tells so much about some other things too. If you can observe lots of samples of something, you can potentially determine the pattern. In this case,
John Strand did some research on gift cards.
Yep, and
same kind of thing.
Same thing for Wi-Fi passwords. You've got a 16-character Wi-Fi password for some default device, and there's some commonality between that. Observing multiple samples gives you.
There's some static data that I can observe.
So, for example, in this one, it was 23 characters. Of the first sequence of 7 digits, the first 3 represent the last 3 digits of the order number, printed near the top in this case, which are likely sequential. The 4th and 6th digit will always be 0. The 5th digit is to be the revenue center, dine-in, carry-out, drive-through. The 7th digit is the register, potentially maybe 1 through 4, 1 through 6, so forth and so on. The second sequence is the store number. The third and fourth of 4 digits apiece is the transaction time, hours, minutes, followed by the date, month,
You're
day,
right, Larry. It's totally like Wi-Fi hacking, like just breaking down the limiting the possibilities of all the different parts of
the last part was 2 digits, and the first 2 digits is the last number of the year the transaction was made in, 9, as in 2019, while the last hasn't been determined.
So you brute force 0 through 9 for the last digit, knowing all those other things, right?
Like this becomes really easy.
This becomes a Python script.
Yeah.
And you're illustrating why I'm here, essentially.
Yes,
because I started out as a cryptanalyst, but cryptanalysts are in essence hackers because they look at a problem
and they see
they say, and they look for patterns, they look for tendencies, and they exploit that. The P plus K equals C. If you can predict or know what the P is, you can figure out the K, which gives you more P.
Yep. Exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Or if obviously if you got the K, you can read P all day. And I mean, I don't know if this is a super secret or not. In the various offices that I worked in doing cryptanalysis on the operations side of the house, where we were trying to actually break codes, whenever we broke something and therefore derived an underlying key, if and when we ever got key, we had to turn that over to some group that would just look at the key, because key in those days, if they were machine generated crypto systems like the Enigma machine, the key, no matter how random it appeared to be, it was machine generated, which means it was done by some sort of algorithm or some sort of
limited by randomness, right?
It was generated.
Yep.
And you could there was whole groups that were focused on trying to figure out, can we figure out how this stuff is being generated? The best example to try, and hopefully people can understand, is when I started doing hacking and started looking at computer and network security and started doing password hacking, there was a lot of organizations, groups, customers, army detachments that were trying to come up with random password generators, and they were doing it based on the Unix command rand, random,
which isn't
so random.
Which isn't random. It looks good, but if you understand how random works, you can reproduce it. Literally, I worked in offices at the time where if we broke a message, if we broke a code, broke a cipher, and we got the plain text message, nobody really cared about the message. We kind of threw it away. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but the key, if we got chunks of key, we had to turn that over to other groups that were doing analysis to try to figure out if they could determine what the algorithm was.
It's interesting, Jeff, having to work for a lottery company, right? And you think about how you want to randomize the winning lottery number, right?
Oh man,
God.
You get into a lot of creative discussions.
How many times I've been sitting at a bar, watching the monitor on the the TV up in the corner with the ball bouncing, and I'm like, that's an algorithm.
It's the first time where they were like,
I would love to look at
where
that.
they were like, research was talking about like lava lamps, and I'm like, what are you guys talking about? Like, I associate lava lamps with like hippies and like these very analog things that you plug in and generates heat and make all these things. And they're like, no, like actually, to make things truly random, one of the theories is certainly years ago was you got cameras that are looking at how the bubbles bubble up through lava lamps.
Over multiple
that
lava
was
lamps.
A random number generator.
And there's a company here in the U.S., if I remember correctly, that has in their lobby like several hundred lava lamps
with cameras.
And I cannot remember the company, and somebody is shouting me in either Discord or in their car right now.
You can probably Google it and find it. But like, if you remember when PGP first came out and you were setting up your PGP keys,
you had to type in the keyboard. Yeah.
Well,
or
you
move
had
your
to
mouse.
move the mouse around. You had to just randomly
create
move
some
in
randomness.
a field to create the randomness. The irony is that there's very little random in the world.
Yeah, it's true.
And I think we've talked about this before, but if you flip a coin 10 times and you record what the results are for 10 flips, you expect 5 heads and 5 tails. That's sort of the flat average. But the reality is you rarely get 5 heads and 5 tails.
But you do that a billion times.
Right. But and I'm not a mathematician. You graph it out, you track it, and it becomes a parabola, and you're approaching that 50-50
There's so many stories, but then I have to segue into Malicious Life with Ray
Levy.
We
want to talk about crypto.
Malicious Life podcast did a great interview, and we've interviewed the folks from the Loft, but Malicious Life did a recent interview with the Loft, and they were talking about Loft Crack and how that was one of their first products and stuff like that. Our mutual friend Space Rogue is on that panel, and they're telling the story of the Loft. And what I love about that interview is I think we all have either formed relationships or listened to different things or read books about what happened at the Loft, and kind of form our own opinions and stuff like that. But to bring it back to Loft Crack, right? I mean, that was their first kind of product, right? They sold, they bought the rights back, and they talk about that whole story. But that's very much about the landman hashes, right? And what we're talking about in limiting that randomness, being able to split that password, up in equal parts for the landman hash is very much an attack on crypto that is kind of a theme to what we're talking about.
Back in those days, in the early days, Unix, which was very common, the passwords were limited to 8 characters. I mean, you could
salted either, right?
You could create a 12-character password, but they were only looking at the first 8 characters.
And not salted.
And it wasn't salted, buddy.
Right.
And it was stored in a world-readable file.
Yep.
Etsy password, baby.
Great. By the way, great interview as well.
Passwords. What made Loftcrack so interesting was the Windows passwords, and I used to run Loftcrack. Windows passwords were also sort of based on an 8-character password similar to Linux, but they were really 2 4-character passwords
converted to uppercase. Converted to uppercase.
So Loftcrack would actually solve the first 4 and the last 4 sort of concurrently. It was fascinating.
And a great story too. Joe Grand talks about being a teenager, being in the Loft, and in any point you listen to those folks that were involved in the Loft in the early days, you glean something different. And Joe Grand kind of describes the scenario of I had to get there. I didn't have a car. I had to ride my skateboard. I had to take the T in Boston to get there. And there was shady neighborhoods where teenagers would pick on each other. And I had to make sure I got in. He's every time I got to the Loft, I was oh, I'm glad I got there safely. And I love those stories about how it kind of played out. And I love gleaning those different kind of details about how it played out. I took the T, rode my skateboard to like that shady area in South Boston, right?
That head shop
was, right?
And you get so many bits of that from so many books, like
books and podcasts, right? And you glean those different bits.
Yeah. And like, so I'm trying to remember what the book was, and I can remember where I was listening to it.
Well, the intersection of CDC, Joseph Menn did a great job writing the book about CDC.
Yep, the CDC.
And that was the relationship between Loft and CDC.
Yep,
and
that was the
member
one.
crossover.
Yep, that was it was the Joseph Menn CDC book that had a bunch of Loft folks, and because I can remember where I was listening to that.
Yeah.
And it was weird because I was listening to that Joe Grand stuff. And some of that the CDC politicalness nature of that later, while I was actually fossil hunting outside of my hotel in Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
Like total mashup of different shit. I'm listening to this tech book while staying at a hotel doing tech work, having just gone to this little dive bar and had gator stew and an amazing beer. And now, like, looking at these cliffs outside my hotel and going out and fossil hunting and finding fossils. Like, total mashup.
Crazy stuff.
Yeah.
Damn. Lee's number two.
Lee's number two. Let's go to Lee's number two.
You know, poop jokes are not my favorite, but they're a solid number two.
Solid number two. China bans Tesla cars from entering military. Good segue, because I have a story about car security as well. So, what is it, Lee? China's not allowing Tesla cars to go into military facilities, like kind of like the reverse of like us banning Huawei. Like China's doing the same thing.
No. This is actually so there's 7 cameras on a Tesla, and you can't turn them off.
Nope.
Right.
So they're saying they can't come into a sensitive facility where they could record information that, sensitive or, secret information. And the reason I put it in there is not because I want to say anything negative about China. I'm like, our cars are recording a lot of shit right now. There's some places you probably don't want them around intellectual property now.
Yeah, but but also Lee, to your point, like what's China hiding?
Well,
lots of things, but
this is going to be a big problem in the future, no matter what, because of people don't realize the subsidy of what data cars are actually collecting and where they're actually making money. You're talking about roads, like there's a bazillion sensors on the Teslas. You can figure out what roads change elevation, how many bumps there are, what level of precipitation happened at this specific geolocation at this time, going this speed limit with other cars around you. So not just video telemetry, you're talking about Wi-Fi telemetry, geolocation telemetry, road and altitude telemetry.
What a creepy! I find it creepy. I was in an accident last year, and when you fill out the police report, they ask you all of those things. What was the weather? Where were you? What were you doing at the time of the accident? Fill out the diagram. It sounds like in Tesla's case, they could fill out my accident report for me. Like the car could report what I'm reporting. And
yes,
are we entering a future where Paul enters what happened in the accident, and they're verifying that with what the vehicle telemetry is telling them actually happened in the accident?
It's Black Mirror.
But also could be a positive thing, as we talked about. When we talk about, fraud is like a thing that I find myself as a hacker, cybersecurity professional. Like we protest against fraud. Like largely what we do is like uncover fraud, right? Like fraud is a bad thing. I like to think we're good people that are uncovering fraud. At what point can that help?
That we do.
But what point they can help fraud as well? Like if we're honest people, that matches what we say, right? Like, dude, it was raining. Here's how fast I was going, like in a rough estimation. Here's the turn I was making. Here's I stopped at the stop sign or not. And they're going to validate that against what my vehicle said actually happened. Yeah, no. And like if any of us are an honest person, I'm telling you what happened. If someone wants to lie and commit fraud, is that a countermeasure to that? And is that a good thing or a bad thing? That's
so. I mean, I think about this from my perspective, where I'm significantly more low tech in that, my new to me truck has Bluetooth, so I can pair my phone with it and play.
It doesn't have all that other telemetry.
But it doesn't have all that other stuff. But I've added a dash cam.
Yeah,
and more importantly, I've added a dash cam and a behind me cam to the same dash cam.
Right.
And it turns on automatically and doesn't turn off, by the way. So when I park the car, it's still going.
Is that an opt-in or
no?
Do I get a decreased insurance rate if I turn that stuff on? Well, that's my issue.
But yeah, that would be good to know if it is a. But the point being is that it can work both ways. Is
it opt-in until I've been in enough cases that there's a suspect I've committed fraud where now I'm driving a vehicle and I can't opt out?
Yeah.
Where's the line? Where's the line? That's the scary part.
Tyler?
The car manufacturers are building it into the functionality of the CAN bus and the car functionality. Overall, your windshield wipers won't turn on because it can't auto sense the precipitation from the 10 sensors on your windshield. So the entire car functionality is built around this telemetry data that's getting sent up and sold out to companies that may not be very good at protecting your
Tyler,
data.
I've been in traffic court and I've watched someone try to speak to the judge about the weather conditions and whether or not their windshield wipers and or headlights were on at the time.
Oh God.
What if we're progressing to a future where that shit's automatic? And should it be opt-in, opt-out? That's kind of scary to me.
Well, Minority Report.
Yep.
I was just going to say Minority Report. It was zoop, zoop, zoop.
Yeah.
Nope. Clearly your car
you did X, Y, Z or not, right?
And then to add a little bit more to that, each one of these cars also has a VPN and data upload that goes to, home base. Where's the protection and who's looking at what additional telemetry's in there?
But Tyler, let's talk about protection, right? Dodge is offering a software update that you got a Dodge Charger. Let's throw this out there.
Score. Like, all right, I'm done.
Like, I think this is cool. You can get a Dodge Charger that is 485 horsepower or 707 horsepower. I'm just telling you right now, I want the 707 horsepower. Like, I don't know if I can afford the insurance and speeding tickets to come along with that, but they've got a firmware update that, like, when I drop it off to the valet or I arm it at night, like, it's basically the firmware determines this car is now 3 horsepower, not 707.
Yep, limp mode.
It's 3 horsepower.
Limit mode.
So the exact opposite end of ludicrous speed.
Right. So someone steals my car. Like, can you just imagine the chase with the police? Like, I got 3 horsepower.
There is no chase.
And I'm in a vehicle that could do 707. Like,
but like that's
the irony.
And the irony is that I pulled into the gas station here on my way to the show, and I needed diesel in the truck, and there was a Challenger at the pump and another one on the back of the tow truck that had clearly been repaired and was missing the front nose cone. And I'm like, I want the one without the front nose cone, because you know that's the fast one.
707 horsepower.
Because someone fucked that shit up.
All these manufacturers doing these electric vehicles and all this stuff, and Dodge is like, yes, you can get 707 horsepower. Like, I kind of want that.
And you know what? I can't afford a goddamn one of them.
I don't know. The Charger's pretty affordable. I mean, horsepower to price ratio. Is it expensive?
You're still talking one of these new Chargers with the crazy horsepower. You're still talking between $65,000 and $90,000.
Is that chief crazy horsepower?
I don't know. But still, I mean, you're under $100,000 for that horsepower, Larry. That's pretty good.
You could do the same in a Vet.
Is that less than $100,000?
Yep. You could do a Vet for about 95.
A GTR is a whole lot less than either of those, but
yep. And I mean, you could spend, $25,000 and put something in, a semi-restored, Resto Mod Classic. You're talking $65,000 for 1,200 horsepower.
Or it can be. I mean, you could be about $100,000 or so into a Tesla that does 0 to 60 in less than 3 seconds.
For about 4 miles, about the same as you would in that 1,200 horsepower, and you nail that 1,200 horsepower fuel engine with turbos and nitrous, and boom, and your Tesla is still going. There's trade-offs to all of these things.
There is. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. But crazy they can control it with firmware.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. Absolutely. Now, all you need to do is you need to hack the key fob, so that you can unlock it and unlock that mode of firmware, because it's got to be something in the key fob.
Because if it's software, it's hackable. It's a great point,
Yes, it
Larry.
is. Yeah, and if it's software, it's hackable, and if it's wireless, it's hackable at some point.
So does that mean you can buy a regular Tesla and hack it to
if
go
it's hardware, it's
faster?
hackable too.
Yeah, hardware and software is totally hackable.
Everything is hackable.
Yeah. The answer is
Most
likely.
We should really end this thing.
Yeah, 2 last stories. A Windows 95 Easter egg was discovered.
Windows 95?
So if you want to be brave and go run Windows 95, you go to open its About Windows, select one of the files, type Mortimer, and the names of the developers will start scrolling. Apparently, that's like a Windows 95 Easter egg.
So that's an Easter egg that nobody ever found?
That no one ever found. Apparently, I haven't done extensive research, but apparently
there's a ton of Easter eggs in 95.
And also, I thought it was interesting that this feels like a hacker thing to me, that someone got really high and was like, if we were to age wine in space, man, like we were to send like a case of wine, a case of Bordeaux, I believe it was, into space and put that in the space station for a few years, but then also take a case of Bordeaux from the same year, from the same vineyard, right? And we were to age it on Earth where there's gravity. And then, like,
sweet,
right? Like, dude, 5 years from now,
sweet,
we converge. Dude. We get sommeliers that like understand all the different nuances, and we have sommeliers taste them. Like, which one's gonna? What was amazing to me is like, basically, sommeliers were like, the space age wine was way better. And I was like, that's really cool. Like, because if you think about it, when you age a fermented beverage, beer or wine, like on Earth, there's gravity that's pulling all the
sediment.
the particles and sediment to the bottom, but in space they're free floating. And like, is there a difference? I'm like, that's a really cool experiment. I was intrigued by this.
I mean, that's an interesting experiment, and for me, that reminds me very much of one of the things that goes around in the bourbon type community, and specifically one that Deviant did, where the deal was that you could put bourbon in a barrel, and age it,
send it to space.
No, you could put bourbon in a barrel and age it.
Send that shit to space. Like,
you
once
could
it
send it
hits
to
the,
space.
like once bourbon hits the bottle, the aging
done.
process
It's
stops.
done.
I feel like with beer and wine, and there was some Jeff, you were on that call with Adrian. We were debating like how much if it ferments or ages with beer or wine is very different from whiskey. But I think it's really cool
Adrian
to think
was
about.
Wrong, by the way.
But I think it's really cool that if you were to take whiskey in a barrel, take that barrel, send it to space, have one on Earth. It's the exact same ingredients. Like take half your batch, age one on Earth, age one in space. Whether it's beer, wine, or whiskey, you got to do differently. Whether it's in a barrel or a bottle.
But you got to do it with the aging. You got the appropriate aging technique.
Like, I thought it was really cool to think about, because all of the particles down to the molecule level are going to be not succumbing to gravity in space versus succumbing to gravity. Like, what's the? I'm like, that's kind of cool.
So the one that Deviant did was, you put bourbon in a barrel and it takes on the flavor of the barrel.
Right.
Like, that takes years. Can you speed this process up? And one of the things that he heard about was if you take oak and your bourbon and you put it in an ultrasonic bath, can you speed that up?
So sound waves.
Well, yeah,
influence it. Yeah.
And the answer was
bourbon
yes.
when it's first distilled is clear.
Yep,
and,
correct.
And it
It's the
becomes
barrel,
a brown
yes.
liquor.
Yep.
Because
Yeah.
it goes in and out. It gets soaked up.
And you can speed that aging process up.
Process can be speed up. So
by ultrasonic. His problem was that his ultrasonic bath would turn off after like 22 minutes. And he needed to run it for a couple of days. So he created an Arduino thing to
put sound waves in.
he created an Arduino to trigger the timer.
Yeah.
I am more convinced that what makes bourbon is not as much gravity as it is atmospheric biometric difference.
Yep. So
barometric
pressure. Yep.
Which is what makes the whiskey go in and out of the barrel.
Yep.
I love science, and
how do you replicate that in space?
I love science that's applied to like making spirits better, or beer or wine.
I like drinking whiskey, but I
like drinking whiskey too, and we drank a lot of it on the show, and I think it's a good point to end. I want to thank everyone for listening and watching to this edition of Paul's Security Weekly. Larry, take us out.
Over and out.